We are representing the Thunderbird family and showing that Thunderbird is not only surviving but thriving here in 2019 with the #1 program, Masters in Management in the world. As you all know, over the last 9 months, I hope you have seen the great progress we've made from our move to downtown to the transformation of the curriculum, the opening of hubs around the world, including Seoul just last week, and many other great steps forward. We want to thank each and every one of you and all of our partners around the world for all your support and engagement. I want to remind you that one of our top priorities, if not our most important priority, is recruiting fantastic students from around the world to be in our Masters of Global Management program starting in fall of 2019. We would encourage you, I encourage you and ask you to, find great candidates, send them to us, show that, share with them how wonderful your experience was at Thunderbird, and why it's so wonderful to be part of the Thunderbird family here in Phoenix, but also around the world where we're all located. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker tonight. I want to thank, though, before I do, our fantastic team, Petra Yates and Patrick McDermott and Robin and many others who have worked to put this on. Our co-chairs of the Thunderbird Global Alumni Network, Hiroshi Amada, Heather Wise, and Doug Deerdorf. All those of you who have agreed to be part of the Agile teams will be sharing much more about that. And then just remind you to put on your calendars the Thunderbird Global Alumni reunion in Tokyo, September 12th to 14th. We're really excited about that, and thank Hiroshi and Kanishi and all those working on that to make that happen. So now, certainly without further ado, I want to say that we're just delighted to introduce Professor Mark Esposito. And he is a fantastic new addition to the Thunderbird family. I will let Mark tell you more about himself. He's a truly fantastic, not only academic, but practitioner of global leadership and management in the fourth industrial revolution and circular economy, areas that we really want to advance and be the vanguard of. Mark is joining us and will become one of our faculty members full-time as of July 1st. And he's going to be sharing with you some of his background, some of his research, some of the areas he's working on, and in addition, including a new book that he has just published on the AI, artificial intelligence in the public. We're just going to ask everyone to mute if possible. If you join, welcome, because we're going to get feedback. Thank you so much. Mike's going to speak for about 20 to 30 minutes, but then we'll open up to question and answer and discussion. And if you have any ideas for themes or topics or speakers as we continue this webinar series, please let us know. And then one last thing, please do mark on your calendars. We're going to have a professional development and networking event in Phoenix on April 10th, I believe. I'll confirm the date in a second with our colleagues and the Thunderbird team. So without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Mark. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. It's, by the way, folks, as we know here in Europe and many other parts of the world, it's very late. It's midnight. But I want to thank him for not only agreeing to do this webinar, but also joining our amazing faculty at Thunderbird, who we continue to add to with folks like Mark and his incredible experience and expertise from around the world. As you'll gather very quickly, Mark is a true T-bird in heart and soul and mind. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, so like Sanjeev, I am at the World Economic Forum in Davos, but in the different locations. I'm connecting with the hotel Wi-Fi, so I'm crossing my fingers that there will be enough power bandwidth for our conversation to happen tonight. I'm very, very grateful to join Thunderbird. As Sanjeev showed you in the introduction, being a T-bird is more of a fact of life rather than just a specific affiliation. I discovered I was a T-bird when I met with Sanjeev, when I met with other folks at Thunderbird. I was in Thunderbird in before the move to Phoenix, and then when they moved to Phoenix. So during my 2 visits, I felt blown away by finally finding home in the mindset, the spirit, and the openness that characterizes a Thunderbird around the world. This pushed the conversation to then think about the collaboration. And the reason why I think this is particularly timely is that we're connecting from the World Economic Forum, which is the entity where the concept of the fourth industrial revolution was brought forward for the first time. Myself, I got into the forum in 2014. I started to be part of the reports that were generated on innovation and entrepreneurship. And then after this, I was asked to join the Circular Economy Center. And that was for me another major discovery in understanding the opportunities we have to reconcile economic and social drivers with the benefit of environmental drivers into this phenomenal new paradigm that is the circular economy. And I think more and more of the programs at Thunderbird will try to include the circular economy as a great economic opportunity for us to thrive from an organizational perspective. I think the fact that we're dealing with a global community will help us to tap on practices that are emerging from all over the world. And I look forward to more and more of the alumni hubs around the world to help us really collect the evidence that we need to demonstrate that shifting from linear to circular is probably one of the larger economic opportunities that we have ever had. So from the circular economy, which is still part of my research, I was then asked to join the future of production. And so we started to look at very burning questions, such as what will happen to factory floors? What happens when automation and artificial intelligence will make many of the jobs we currently have redundant? What happens in terms of the impact on policy? And I was sharing with Sanjeev today that I just published a work on the policy required to regulate the sharing economy. And so you can see that the conversation around circular economy, future productions, sharing economy, they all tend to converge under a specific type of framework, or if you want to call it in a more, let's say, poetic way, a dome. And this dome is what we call the fourth industrial revolution. So about a year ago, I was asked to join the World Economic expert group in the fourth industrial revolution, and that's what really shaped a lot of my thinking and teaching. And when Sanjeev and I met, we found out that if there was a direction where we should have really put all of our efforts, was really to create a voice coming from Thunderbird, not only from Phoenix but around the world, of a specific sort of like global leadership required to support the rise of the fourth industrial revolution. So tonight in the conversation I'd like to share with you, I have a few slides that will help us as we are try to navigate the concept for maybe the first time, and if not, just to share with you a little bit more about some of the key ideas around. So I hope you can see the screen. I'm not too sure whether you do. If you do, just send me a chat so I know that.
It's up, Mark. It's up. It's good.
I think just to really summarize so that we have a basis for the conversation and hopefully the Q&A. The fourth industrial revolution is really the convergence of these very powerful technologies. They're now happening concurrently to the normal automation that we have seen since the beginning of any industrial time. So I think a common mistake when people don't really know too much about this is to think that the fourth is a consequence of the third, but there are many parts of the world where we're currently seeing the rise of the third is primarily the fact that we're shifting to renewables, a more fledgling internet, and some sort of like a driverless or autonomous transportation. And this is fine. This part is happening. It will continue to happen more and more. But what we can see is that at the same time, which is the novelty here, a number of very powerful technology that are now combinatorial, so they can be combined and they can become almost like this smart nervous system, are now able to change dramatically production, change efficiency, change the conversation the organization have with their value chains, determine productivity in an entirely different way. And as a matter of fact, when things are so powerful, they also expose our weaknesses. And naturally, our weaknesses is in the labor, not only in the labor force, but I think probably the most important weakness that we discovered with this work is that the nature of the jobs we currently do is exposed to redundancy, primarily because the job that we currently do in large part were designed where automation was not as fast as right now, and there was nothing so powerful like the integration of some of the technologies that you see listed in the specific slide. And then I think this is the conversation I'd like to have with you tonight, is that technology by itself does what technology is always designed to do, which is improving efficiency and making sure that we can simply be more productive. In a nutshell, decrease the inputs and increase the outputs. I think any businessman would understand this as almost like a no-brainer. Problem with this is that when this technology is so powerful, some of the jobs that were designed around some sort of like mechanistic capacity, repetition, or the fact that we wanted labor to be an expression of a specific type of productivity, and now are becoming exposed to major questions such as, should I replace a number of employees for a new software, a new algorithm, or a new robotics, or more robots, versus the conversation about should I preserve employment and try to find ways for technology and humans to work together. And this is so like a very big question that tends to be discussed these days, also in places like the forum, is to what extent the symbiosis or the relationship between machines and humans can really be empowered to create opportunity we currently don't have. Because if we leave this only to the economics, naturally, technology will always make us redundant. And I think this is really the different part of the conversation that didn't happen before. Just as a point of reference, in the second industrial revolution, we have also disrupted the way we used to do things before, but the penetration time was much longer. From the second to the third, you could argue the same. All of you remember the transformation of our system from the telephone all the way down to the internet, but we also remember that the transformation took some time. It didn't happen overnight. Today, we have in way faster cycles, and therefore we tend to see that much more of the possible risk tend to be also accelerated. So we're talking about much more about systemic risk rather than the type of risk that we used to have before that tend to be much more linear, but also partially incremental. So this is really, folks, to give you a perspective about the story behind. And I think to provide you a bit of a visual shock, the major challenges of the fourth industrial revolution is that as it happens at the system level, it's very difficult to simply confine it to just one area. It's currently touching upon a number of different things. It's impacting services. It's impacting retailing. It's impacting distribution. It's impacting, as we mentioned before, factory floors. It's impacting any job where we used to have blue collars, as we used to call them, employed on specific tasks. It's impacting those jobs that tends to emerge from the sharing economies, say, for example, Uber, because as soon as technology more powerful than simply having drivers will be coming into place, of course, this group of people will possibly be a part of this place. Is impacting white collars, people that are to some extent working in offices, because very powerful technology are now making possible for entire job category to be replaced. For example, accountants or notary or lawyers. The slide I want to show you next, which is our second slides, is really so like a visual about some of the challenges we have. On one side, we do have what we consider the mainstream of any given industry. That's what we actually call business as usual. where we continue to do things as we always have. And on the other side, which you guys notice is the larger convergent circles, we have in a number of really interesting non-markets and no-market drivers. They're currently now playing a major role. So what makes it very difficult for business to run as usual is the fact that not only the industry per se might be more competitive, or we might have competition coming from areas of the world that we were not expecting to become contenders a few years back, but we also have a number of prevailing factors. They're equally changing the nature of the conversation, and they are partially determined by the power of the technology. But as I mentioned before, it's in the combination of this technology with each other that we really see an entirely different story and narrative that is actually emerging. So in 2 slides, we have really seen, first of all, a definition about what this is, the opportunity of thinking about integrating humans with technology to create markets, opportunity, jobs that we currently don't have, but the threat that is also very characterized by media. And we tend to have this dichotomy between the good side of AI and the bad side of AI. It tends to be now very visible. That naturally could come if this technology is not integrated into a proper and responsible conversation on what should we do in case in which the nature of our job will not be redesigned accordingly to take into account the fact that this technology will expose some of the flaws of the original design that might have been originated many years back. I have a question for you before I move on. I'd like to know if you had to quantify how much time at work tends to be repetitive for you from 0 to 100. What would be the number you would indicate? And if you can do this in the chat, I'll be able to have a sense about how much of your daily routine at work is repetitive, and try to quantify this with a number from 0 to 100 if you can, so that I like to see the state of play of this. And then I'll tell you a rule of thumb that I learned when I was working on the book that Sanjeev has mentioned. Okay, so I see different tendency. I see people on the upper side where you have a number like 50, for example, and I see some of you that are swinging between very little, 5 to maybe 15 or 20. I see some of you in the mid-range, 25, 30. We see 30 to 40. Okay, so thank you guys for having done this. I think you kind of know where I'm going with this conversation. Is everything that tends to be around 30% of above tends to have a very strong economic argument for a firm to consider an alternative. Just to give you a sense of perspective, in average, and we're talking generic term, just to give you a high level view on this, labor cost, say for example salaries, that tend to be about 30 to 35% of the entire cost of an organization. So if you're looking at how companies make money, they can only make money 2 ways. One is they increase the sale, to the one that decrease their cost. You can decrease the cost by reducing how much you pay every month to run the operation, or you can decrease your cost by expanding what you do so that you sell more and you produce at a cheaper price. Now, it's very tempting if somebody will tell you that a large part of your budget can now be reduced because you cannot replace labor. And that happened in many professions. So we see this, for example, with the accountants as a population is decreasing around the world. We see this with legal firms. Legal firms are not necessarily dismissing lawyers, but they are slowing down, if not sometimes freezing on new hires. And that's because, of course, technology makes the legal job much more efficient by facilitating what lawyers call discovery through, of course, artificial intelligence. We see professions like cashier in supermarket has been slowly replaced by a first prototype of smart computers. And if you remember what a cashier does, you remember when the cashier was scanning products on the price scanner, that was highly repetitive. And suddenly one day came up and say, well, if you're taking all of this number of people that currently are doing the same job over and over again with a level of repetition of maybe 80%, and you're replacing them with like some sort of like smart robot that will do self-checkout. Well, we now changing the relationship. We used to have 30 people working on working on a scanner at the cashier, and now we have 1 or 2 people supervising 30 computers and 30 robots. And the reason why this happened is because there was an economic reasoning behind, but there was also a really old design of the job. So if you find yourself currently in a job where you have some sort of repetition, and one of the questions you should ask yourself is in which way you can mutate the more of your job to a job with less repetition, or in which way we can liberate your time for what you currently are doing every day repetitively and allocate your resources to something else. And I think this is where the conversation should be a bit more mature, not necessarily in thinking about an extremely binary system of replacing labor with an algorithm, but how do I free you from the repetition that right now does not necessarily have marginal value and allow you to dedicate yourself to more significant tasks. Let me reassure you, there is no intelligence in AI per se. AI is a transactional technology that is able to discover things that it might take us too long to discover, predict, and eventually prescribe. It's a technology that allows us to use experiences that tends to be varied to come up with correlations and possibilities that we would not really be able to do. But I'm going to give you a very simple analogy. We all learn to do math at school. And when we are at school, I do remember doing math on my notebook, writing down the different calculus. And then suddenly the calculator became much more used, more and more, so that it became cheap. Everybody could have a pocket calculator, and now our calculators on our smartphones. So none of us is doing math by hand anymore. The fact that we don't do it anymore because the calculator is doing for us, it doesn't mean that we got displaced or unemployed. It simply means that we're not allocating our time to something that used to be time consuming. And now we can spend our time on something else. It's the same principle. It's how do we identify in the organization those opportunities for technology to do what you currently are doing repetitively, but allocate the time that we're gaining now from having freed you into something that is meaningful. And that happens by re-engaging what companies do, how companies are currently working, what type of diversity the company is currently embracing, what type of talent pool, and also, which is important, how will the company be able to close the skill gap between the type of job that we used to have versus the type of job that we'll need to have in the future. So this is to give you a perspective about what makes the conversation on the fourth industrial revolution interesting is the fact that this is a prevailing strong conversation about what will change and what is about to be impacted. There is clearly a risk that we may not be able to manage this. I personally fear that governments in these interesting times that we're living might not be up to speed with understanding the role of government, with the level of regulation and policy that we need to support an economy that is going to be more and more volatile, and how do we engage the private sector to understand that this technology can become a vector for improvement of something that we currently don't have, rather than just an economic transaction that will replace labor for something that is more, let's say, accurate through either robotics or artificial intelligence. So this is, folks, to give you a little bit of an overview on this. This presentation has multiple dimensions to this. The part where I will finish is just the state of play of technology right now. This is a slide that was produced by Accenture in 2016. So now it's a couple of years old. It was done towards the end of 2016. And it was specific on blending the fourth industrial revolution to the circular economy. What you see here is really the fact that first of all, there is an opportunity for us not only to accelerate our technology, but also to make it much more sustainable. But there's some technologies that you might all be aware of. Some you might not be aware of, so it's a good opportunity to maybe go deeper into this. But you'll notice some of the usual suspect from blockchain, which is now becoming very popular, highly discussed, to things like driverless car, and in their technical name of autonomous vehicles. You see the whole conversation around machine vision, machine-to-machine communication, all the way down to machine learning. You see 3D printing, which is now, again, a conversation that we see happening more and more. You see robotics, as we mentioned. And then you see some of the trends in agriculture. We call it vertical farms in colloquial terms. The more technical term is hydroponic and aeroponics. And then we have in conversation on genetic engineering, advanced green chemistry, all the way down to more of the industrial Internet of Things, which you guys see in the third quadrant. And of course, the very final part is things related to cloud, mobile connectivity, smartphones, and things like this. So it shows you that we are accelerating rapidly these technologies as the investment are actually coming in, and as more and more these technologies are going from the R&D labs all the way down to some sort of like pilots, then to some degree of early adoption, and eventually full integration and high adoption. So I'd like to provide you with maybe a proxy to determine in your own environment how quickly technological change will happen. So if you start noticing that this technology are becoming cheaper, much more available, if you start noticing that this technology are becoming available around the world as you travel, if you start noticing that this technology are becoming customizable, if you start noticing that some of the technology are turning from product into services, so if you start noticing a transformation of their cost structure so that it's becoming more and more plausible for these technologies to be used, becoming general purpose technologies, then naturally those technology will rapidly advance, penetrate into different markets, and over time they'll become the new standard. I think we all remember when we didn't have smartphone, but we had maybe mobile phones that used to work with GSM technology and text messages. And we saw that over a few years, that technology was replaced by a much more integrated and so like fledgling technology, which is what is now currently powering our smartphones. That was possible because the price of phones became affordable. The same, if you notice that more and more people around you start having a 3D printers. If you start seeing, as you guys walk on the street, a 3D printing shop. If you hear in France who said, oh, this present, we went to the 3D printer and we had it printed, or somebody saying I 3D printed home. So if the experience of every day shows you that there is an increasing presence of this technology in your life, then it might be a good proxy to determine that this technology are currently scaling. At the moment when this snapshot was taken, what we see maturing and scaling at only few technologies is likely to imagine that in the next few years, as more and more players are getting interested and engaged in the conversation around this, we'll have more and more of this technology rising. So this is, I think, maybe a good point for us to stop from the perspective of the conversation and see how your question can guide us in the remaining part of the webinar that we have, so that we make it more and more active. But I hope, again, to summarize, that I gave you a sense of perspective about this buzzword that we're hearing more and more. It's much more than a buzzword. It's really an entirely different cultural paradigm that is shaping up, and it's shaping up on the foundation of the fact that important things such as the principle of labor, the principle to our planet, and the principle of life have been profoundly transformed in the 21st century. And therefore, I think we're just trying to see how an entirely new collective story now being supported by the rise of streaming power technology and the opportunity that we have as society to own the conversation and to redesign some of the systems for their future efficiency. So that's to summarize. I don't know how we can do
Mark,
this.
thank you so much. I was wondering, before we open up to questions,
Yes,
I think the best way to do some of the questions is for folks to put their questions in the chat, and we can start taking them one by one. But maybe you could just take a step back and say a little bit more about your personal story, a little bit about where you've come from, all the way to what you're doing now, including the company that you've co-launched with some others. I'm sure our alumni from around the world would love to hear that story.
Sure. So, I have many chapters, or I have many cycles of my life. So when I was very, very young, and now it's 25 years and more, I was a professional hockey player, and I played in the first division of the University League in the U.S. That was one side of the story. My career ended because of a knee accident, like happens in the sport. And then I started my second chapter. My second chapter was getting into an academic journey. So I did my PhD between France and New York. And then I started my career at UMass in Massachusetts. And I was there. I was on my tenure track as assistant professor. Then I ended up in France for a period of time. And then in 2011, I joined Harvard. I was lucky to meet Michael Porter, who, if you have done a business degree, you know from the readings that you probably have done in strategy. So supposedly, I think he's the most cited scholar in business. It's, of course, a strategy guru. And Porter was like supporting me as I was transitioning to a new role at Harvard. So I started to work at Harvard, and Harvard was for me this incubator of possible idea where I was trying to test. From there, I started to become much more, it's how you would call me, Sanjeev, more of an entrepreneurial academic. And so I started to get more and more engaged with companies in their advisory boards, in action projects. And then in 2015, 16, I co-founded with 4 other gentlemen a company called Nexus Frontier Tech, which is an artificial intelligence studio, as we want to call it. So we started with nothing, like really just the pocket money. And now we have over 120 employees around the world. We are in 4 locations. So we have London staff. We have a larger staff of scientists in Vietnam. We have a group of scientists in Bangkok. We have about 10 employees in Japan. And so Nexus is like my first important entrepreneurial experience. How to go from ideation all the way down to startup, raising capital, and of course the challenges with that. After especially the financial crisis, where now there's much more caution in the markets, all the way down to the cultural differences. So I think the experience itself, Sanjeev, is a T-bird experience, so to say, because it really taps on some of the value that defines our institutions. And so tomorrow, when I'll see Sanjeev at the forum, I'll be split into 2 roles. The first one will be in a meeting where Sanjeev will honor me with his attendance, which is about Nexus, and that we're presenting an opportunity for artificial intelligence to accelerate our promise towards sustainability. And in the afternoon, I'll wear more of my academic hat, and I will attend an official WEF session on the circular economy and an initiative that is an initiative I've been part of since about a year. So I'm not that good to talk about myself, Sanjeev, but yeah, I think
thank you so much.
Just provide a little bit of a journey.
Well, amongst many other things, Mark is like many of us as T-birds, lived and worked all over the world, speaks, I think now 7 languages. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, 6 plus 1, which means 6 that I speak and 1 that I mumble, but
and maybe just one last thing, and then there's a question. There's a question that I'll mention that was put in the chat. say a little bit about the new book, maybe some of the main headlines on the new book. And then the first question we have is, what are your thoughts on, sort of universal basic income, such as where in Scandinavia and other countries around the world and jurisdictions are experimenting with this approach to addressing the increasing potential unemployment, joblessness as a result of technological change.
So, Sanjeev, I was from the book. So it's called The AI Republic, and the subtitle is The Nexus, and we play with the words there, between humans and intelligent automation. We argue that this very powerful technology is unfortunately only in the hands of very large tech companies around the world. They are primarily the large Silicon Valley company and the company out of China. And very few players can really access this technology, because when this technology is produced, it tends to be acquired by this large company that have enormous amount of financial power. And so we argue for much more democratized access to artificial intelligence. We organize the book into, first of all, demystifying what it is and what it is not. Then the opportunity around the fourth industrial revolution, as mentioned tonight. We're looking into the more technical things because we honor the fact that maybe someone would like to know more about natural language processing, deep learning, general purpose technology, just the nomenclature. And we just spend some time as non-AI scientists, merely as business practitioners and scholars about it. Then we talk about the application in business. And then we open two major conversations towards the end: the role of the government and the education of our children. And this is a book which is designed for people who are not necessarily experts in AI, but they would like to have a sense of ownership about the conversation. So that's pretty much about the book. About the questions, Sanjeev, that I think is very interesting. So I think universal basic income can be a mechanism for us to help transition and subsidize some of the migration from one system to the other. I tend to think that it will be difficult to base an entire economy on universal basic income. We would be tapping on issues like incentives, but also the aggregate growth. Unless we change the way we measure growth and we move away from GDP, I think it'll be difficult. But I find it a great opportunity for government, for example, to help incentivize some resistance to change. So I'm going to make an example. So let's take the example of how we like to change from non-renewable to renewable. So if you're having some support from the government in the energy market, the portfolio, to shift to more renewable forms in the presence of some support with cash or discounts, then the universal basic income in the way will be instrumental for a transformation. So I always say this as a nutshell, Sanjeev. If the UBI can help transform, then be welcome. Just to give a point of reference, it's actually cheaper to provide $1,000 for every person in the U.S. from the age of 18 to the age of 64 every month. So $12,000 for let's say 45 years, something like this, to every single person in the U.S. than to bail a large bank that's about to fail. So it's never just about the money. I think it's more about the opportunity to transform something. And if we use this as a transformative power, then I think it will be a phenomenal way for us to re-engage social policy. And it's a wonderful question. I'm happy this came up. And your call for more questions, Sanjeev, have worked, because now I have to catch up on so many questions. So
let me help you, Mark. There's a great question about 5G in your first chart. We didn't see 5G, and how do you see this technology? And then another question that comes from Glenn is really, with so much focus on technology, what about the sort of social mastery side?
Yeah.
Leaders focus on the people and increasing diversity in teams at the same time.
So very good question. I'll start with the 5Gs. I haven't seen yet in the channel of the conversation, the fourth industrial revolution, a proper space for 5.0. other than the opportunity to talk about it as a consequence to the 4.0. And so, to be very honest with the question, I still don't know whether this is a trend, whether this is a fad, or whether this is something that really will happen. So I think one of the reasons why we don't see this yet is there is lack of clarity on what it will be. I think we are always going to be looking at faster network and technologies. I think it goes into the fact that in the Moore's law, technology doubles every 2 years, and that's fine. It's part of the game. What I don't know, to provide an incomplete answer to the question, is whether that will become another mainstream or not. To the question that Glenn asked, which is all I find is equally fascinating. I think, and Glenn, I'll address it directly to you. I really think this is where we have to work a lot. I mean, again, my background is more in strategy and economics, and the more I go into the core strategy and economics, and the more I realize that it's really about empowering people to understand what's happening. And for me, that's my own very naive definition of leadership. I think what the world needs more than anything else is the really global leadership that is required for these transformative trends to become reality. And I think for too long, we've been thinking that all you need is to empower technology, but if you don't empower the people behind, well, just going to have a godlike technology and a medieval society, which is, I think, what we're seeing now happening more and more. I think that diversity that you're mentioning, Glenn, can be seen in education, but I find the greatest opportunity is how we hire people. I found what is typical of many companies, that we tend to hire people that always look like us, and so there's a lot of similarity bias in firms. Engineering company tends to hire engineers. And I think if we can start having a portfolio of talents represented into the hiring, we'll be able to bring that level of global leadership to a point in which it might be empowered to make decisions even when they don't necessarily know the challenges ahead. But I am happy that this question was selected. Sanjeev.
So Laszlo Block has said that fears about new technologies surrounding AI might be misdirected. Would you agree?
So Laszlo, I don't position myself in any of the, to say, fear versus a euphoria about this technology. For me, the technology is powerful because it's a transactional technology that makes better what we didn't do better before. I fear the misuse or misdirection, as you mentioned it, of this technology by the lack of knowledge and the lack of engagement. I'm always intrigued. Beside the things I do, I have a role with the government of Dubai, and this government is talking about AI at the ministry level. So they have a ministry. In many parts of the Western world, I don't even see proper initiatives happening. We don't really have yet a full engaged conversation at the national level in the US about AI. And I think what we are leaving is, one side to like the Bill Gates and Elon Musk to talk about, this technology being, dangerous. And then you have it on the other side, people thinking about singularity and other people talking about this is the greatest invention of mankind. Unfortunately, I see a lot of bipolarism in the conversation. I don't find an engaged conversation about the potential of this technology. So, but I appreciate the question.
So there's a series of questions on sort of that build on the universal basic income side, which is really about what are the social policies and other social interventions that can be engendered and implemented to really address the potential and actual downsides of all this technological transformation. Besides universal basic income as one potential option, what are some of the other ones that you really see, Mark?
Well, I see, Sanjeev, that a conversation like providing a wider range of support for healthcare and providing a more and more equitable education are becoming popular even in countries where we have privatized this or we have allowed this to become partially private. And not only referring to the US, but referring many parts of the world where we don't have social welfare. And let me try to answer indirectly. If you're looking at those countries in the world, they're the most competitive. And by competitiveness, we go into a very classic definition: high level of productivity and high standards of living. Many of them, they really have a strong social market structure in which you have in both a market proposition with free market rules, but you have a strong presence of the government, and you have an investment in the social infrastructure. I don't think that the trade-off between firms' interest and society interest have to ever be a trade-off. I find, to answer the question, more and more attention to the fact that maybe we don't need to be bound to this ideology that really shaped the 20th century, socialism versus capitalism. Because this ideology represented a specific period of time with a specific spirit. Right now, we talk about capitalism, but most of the middle class in America don't own capitals. So even the name doesn't reflect the nature of the countries anymore. I think it's really this engagement into a threshold where, we're both of us, Sanjeev, are currently in Switzerland. What characterize this country is that the minimal standards are extremely high. And what is interesting is that when you raise minimal standards, it doesn't matter that you have the highest concentration of billionaires in the world, because people's needs are taken care. But when you start having that extreme diversity and disparity in standards, that's where you start tapping on social issues that tend to radicalize. And I think what we've seen in the world in the last few years is if we're not taking care of the social issue, radical ideas and radical movement, they emerge. So I think it's important for us to consider it as vital as we consider the growth in economic terms.
So we have a question from, I think, it just pulled up on me. Here we go. From James Scott. Can you comment on the Wired articles on making AI less artificial and more intelligent, including Fei-Fei Li's drive to make machines better for humanity?
Yeah, so I have to say, as a business scholar, I don't have the knowledge to have an answer whether technology can get there. But the answer to James comes from me talking to the AI scientists who are, most of them Japanese, working in our company. And a question like this would be difficult for them to even conceptualize. I think it's still a dimension that is far from the realization of the technology. I still think that we have significant areas of AI that have to be improved, primarily because AI is, by definition, very narrow-minded. And by saying that, it means that if you're not narrowly defining the scope, it won't work. So I find, James, a conversation on what you read on the article to be mediatic and extremely powerful to the conversation, to the point in which we can talk about this now. But from my own experience working with AI scientists, I find it decoupled from the reality of AI right now. Sanjeev.
Yes. So Glenn asking, and I'll probably jump in as well and ask you to jump in, Mark, are the ethics of leadership and guiding of the fourth industrial revolution being discussed in Davos this year? Is there a palpable awareness of the importance of this? I mean, I'd say absolutely it's being discussed. Whether there is some, transformative or clear ideas, Glenn, and alums around the world is still an open question. The debate about what constitutes ethical leadership in this sort of technological age is sort of very open and widespread here. There's a lot of discussion about the issues that were raised around, universal basic income and what do we do for not only young people, but, workers and employees that are losing their jobs or becoming redundant, as Mark has discussed and you all know. But there is not by any means any consensus. As you know, this year I've been going to Davos now for over 20 years, and this is an interesting year because of the absence of some very important heads of state, United States, France, Britain, and amongst others. And so there does seem to be much more of a somber mood than I've ever seen outside of after 9/11, when of course there was quite a lot of depression here at Davos. So in virtually every conversation that we've been listening to and been engaged in, there's discussion of ethical leadership and ethics, but I wouldn't say that there's some clear answers and ones that are truly transformative or compelling. think that's where we as a T-Bird community have a real opportunity to put our sort of imprint on what does it mean to be an ethical leader in a global economy and globalization 4.0 and the fourth industrial revolution. But Mark, what's your thoughts?
Sanjeev, we're aligned in so many different things, Sanjeev, and I subscribe to what you say. To complement what you said, I think to quote actually a very interesting panel that I watched 2 years ago at the forum, is fact that maybe what we need is a new collective story that we can as society start believing. If you remember what happened after World War II, we were extremely shocked by the violence of that event in our life. And the world was very clear. Peace, democracies, free markets were the answer to our stories. And in 70 years, in many parts of the world, we have created abundance and tremendous opportunity for many people to be lifted up. And if you remember what that was, it was a story that people believed. They believed that government should be democratic, so the people had power to decide. The markets should be free and not overly regulated, and that we should actually live in peace, because peace is a precondition for prosperity. I think we kind of forgot over the generation that this were not given or givens, and we see that technology is simply showing how weak maybe that foundation was if we became oblivious. And the ethics of conversation is really about how do we bring again the sense of ownership about the challenges in the 21st century. The climate, just to be controversial in the right way. We didn't have the issue with the climate in the 20th century. Economic theory in the 20th century was thinking that if you want, just degrade the environment, get to a point in which you're profitable, and you reinvest back in the same. Now we cannot do this with 7 billion and many of them emerging economies anymore. So I really think that the ethics will be redesigned and recalibrated to the challenges of our century. We shouldn't be afraid of having our own story rather than maybe replicating the story of the 20th century. And that's where, as you said, that's where I see T-Bird community to be critical to this. It's a community like ours that I think can really thrive, conversation in their own ways. So thanks for the question.
So one last sort of substantive question in the sense of the topic, but then there's some more important questions about Thunderbird and how we address these issues in the classroom from Julie, and a question about your company and engaging in Silicon Valley, Mark. The last question is really about sort of the impact of all these technologies on human health and the environment. And we started to speak about that with the ethical question, but the question maybe on human health particularly. What's your view on the impacts and effects on human health, both individual and population level?
Yeah, I think, again, I'm happy that, the nature of the question we're receiving are so difficult because they reflect how complex this question really are. And I'm happy that at least we can start, as we all know, it's in the power of the question that we sometimes have half of the solutions that we're looking for. I think, again, we have the technology to address most of the issue. We do have the technology to provide relief and support to a lot of people. And we have the economics also behind. We know that preventative care and preventative medicine is cheaper than critical and intensive medicine. I think who has been the big absentee in the conversation that we had recently, in my humble opinion, is really the government. I find the government, by the nature how they are designed, they have been left behind. They tend to be obsolete in their ability to understand this. And I think in the public debate, I've been hearing a political view on health rather than a universal view on health. And I would hope that we could just go past this difference about ideology and consider that some of this should be really foundations of how a society measures itself. I always remember one of my favorite scholar, Nassim Taleb, who has written a number of bestsellers from Black Swans, Fragility, and so on and so forth. And I follow him on Twitter, and he always reminds that the strength of a society is measuring how it can take care of its weakest members. And I think it's really going back and attaching to the conversation on ethics. I think this is an ethics that has not, the type of ethics we need is not utilitarian, driven by economic principle, but an ethic in which we recognize that as society, we do have a responsibility. But that responsibility doesn't make us weaker. On the contrary, there's a colleague that I met at the University of Cambridge, where I have a research role, who recorded a phenomenal TED Talk. And she said something like this: it's within our hurdles, when we are confined, the best of our creativity is released. And that's exactly what I think the opportunity is. We do have a lot of hurdles and a lot of borders, a lot of confinement and things that we can't overcome. But that's where we have to be better as a society. And I think a conversation like health has to be a conversation not based on a binary scale, but based on a much more comprehensive scale. And I think attached to the conversation on ethics that we had before.
So Julie asked a question that I'll take on, but welcome your thoughts as well, Mark, as you're joining us even more full-time and will be full-time as of July 1st, which is how do we bring these themes, these issues, these topics into the classroom for our students? And so Julie and alumni, what we're trying to do it in 4 ways. One, in our curriculum transformation for the MGM degree, the Master's in Global Management, in the whole global core, from global marketing and finance to regional business environments and so forth, we've asked the faculty to bring in this content through new case studies, through new academic literature, through speakers. And so all of the courses will, in addition to our sort of historic magical triangle of global business and management skills, international political economy and affairs, languages and culture, have this focus on the 4th Industrial Revolution, new technologies, their effects, the opportunities they present for business and managers and leaders around the world. So that's one way in the content that we are going to have in our core courses. 2 is in the concentrations we've created. As you know, we've created 15 concentrations, and many, though not all, will focus on these new technologies directly. We'll have a concentration in global digital transformation, and one on global sustainability, another one on global entrepreneurship. A 3rd is in our partnership with schools and units across ASU. As you all know, ASU has been ranked #1 for innovation 4 years in a row, and part of that, it's not exclusive about technology, is about technological changes. And so whether that's the latest on autonomous vehicles or additive manufacturing or IoT and many of the technologies that Mark mentioned, we're partnering increasingly closely with the Fulton Schools of Engineering and the Institute for Bioscience and Ethics and many others to bring opportunities to our students through content in the classroom, through guest lectures, through applied learning opportunities, and many others. Finally, I'd say in the way we're designing our new building, which will be, we'll start constructing, breaking ground in July, and we want to have our opening in April 2021, our 75th anniversary. We're designing a state-of-the-art 21st century building with the most recent technology, including ones that are very much around the 4th Industrial Revolution, from the holographic globe that invokes the globe at its steady state back on our Glendale campus, to a simulation room that is going to allow our students with faculty and even alums and companies to do scenario planning and data immersive and analytics, to the way we're designing our classrooms, active learning classrooms, where all the tables will be tablets and case studies will be digitized. So these are the 4 ways we're trying to increase this content, these ideas, this availability. I think the 5th and perhaps most important way is for not only our current faculty to sort of upskill ourselves, including myself, but also to bring in fantastic new faculty and partners such as Mark. Of course, what makes us special at Thunderbird is our alums. And so part of the reason we wanted to have this as our opening webinar in the new TGAN sort of webinar series is to invite you all to help us really think through this. I was speaking with several alums over the last weeks and months, and virtually all of them are engaging these issues, whether that's in the shipping industry or consumer facing, in tech itself. And so we want, Thunderbirds around the world really are at the forefront of addressing the 4th Industrial Revolution, leading and managing. So we're going to be reaching out to you again and again to help us make sure that our current students get the very best and most recent knowledge and skills. So anything you want to add as we close up, Mark, and then I'm just going to say some few closing comments. But want to thank you again, Mark, for taking the time this very late at night. But we're so delighted and honored that you're going to be part of the Thunderbird family as a faculty member starting July.
Sanjeev, thanks for having me. I mean, this I consider this webinar as like my initiation, right, to the journey we'll start together, and seeing so much interest about the conversation, the fourth revolution makes me think that it's with the alum that we'll be able to create that's a like symbiosis that will really help us thrive the conversation. And it's a unique. I always say this as a closing remark, Sanjeev. It's a unique period to be alive. I think every generation had its challenges. I think our generation has really a deep challenge, which is not only a challenge about thriving, but it's really the fact that the entire system that gave us what we have is currently going through severe pressure, and to some extent is fragmenting. And so we have two ways, and I say this always in to my students: we can bystand and see this falling and see how we will recover from that, or we can contend. And I would hope that everyone could be like a T-bird and naturally contend in the future rather than bystanding. But I want to say thank you for those of you who decided to spend your time with us, and thank you so much. And Sanjeev, I'll see you tomorrow at the forum.
Thank you so much. So thanks to all of our alums from around the world and faculty, students, staff that joined as partners. We will have another one next month. We will show that information. Many of you asked about the slides. We'll have Mark share it with us, and then we'll share it on to all of you. Mark, if you could just share a screenshot of your new book. People are very interested and excited about that.
I'm looking for it. While you're doing that, I'll look for it.
And third, let me just say that we would welcome your thoughts and guidance, input on what types of issues, themes, topics, but also whether you might be interested or have some other T-Bird alums that you'd like to have present at these webinars. We're going to play around with different formats, not just individual talks, but panel discussions, debates, and so forth. So we also want to be creative in the formats. And so do share your ideas. Thank you all again. Thank you to the team for setting this up. Keep the T-Bird spirit and mystique alive. I know you will. And make sure you recruit students, okay, everyone? Thanks very much. All the best from Davos.